Perfect. It's just started recording. Okay. And at the end as well, hopefully we'll have plenty of time for questions and answers, as well as any feedback that you might have. So if you do have any questions, but you don't want to wait until the end, please feel free to put it in the chat box, and either myself or Alison will try to help answer that for you. If not, then hopefully there'll be plenty of time at the end for us to do that. So, don't worry, we will get through to those. So the aims and objectives for today is to improve your overall understanding and knowledge around female genital mutilation. There'll be information including prevalence, legal frameworks, and health consequences. So the main aim for today is to talk about adult safeguarding. However, we will also be mentioning child safeguarding too, because it's important, and it's always useful to know how both of the types of support work. So I know that a few of us have said that we've never done any sort of FGM training before. Is there anyone in the group who's joined us who has done any sort of FGM training before, or any kind of online learning or any other webinars maybe? Seema? Perfect, thank you.
Yep.
Perfect. I wasn't sure if it was Seema or pronounced differently. So hopefully what will happen with today, so Zoe said that she's done training before too. Perfect. So there's a bit of a mixture today, and some of us haven't, some of us have. That's not a problem at all. We're hoping that, with this presentation, your knowledge that you already have, or even if you don't have any prior to this, it will increase, and you'll feel a bit more confident talking about this or discussing it with any clients that you might be working with. Okay, so I'm going to start the presentation with a video. So just to give you a bit of content warning, as it's survivors who are speaking about their experiences. Okay, does anyone have any thoughts or any comments that they wanted to make about the video? It is quite a hard-hitting and thought-provoking video. I appreciate that. Okay, no problem at all.
Yeah, okay.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah, I was just going to say that that's very, very traumatizing or something. Yeah, but
Yes.
I have an observation about the video that is mostly these young people or young ladies where it was done when they could actually notice it, when could actually feel it. Yeah, because and that were I just wanted to add that there's also some children, babies, they do it to them too.
Yes, that's right.
And it's really, really terrible thing.
Absolutely, it can happen. Thank you, Effie. It happens at any time. It can happen, like you said, when they're babies, so they don't have that memory or that recollection, but the trauma can still be very similar, in that they might not remember why they feel anxious, depressed, or have symptoms of PTSD. But even if you're not conscious of something that has traumatized you, it can still traumatize you. So yeah, absolutely, you're right. I think the women in that video may have been a little bit older, whether they were toddlers or just before they became teenagers. Sarah.
It hits you in the pit of your stomach. It actually makes you feel sick.
Yeah.
To think about these poor women, of what they've been through, and it actually brings tears to your eyes. It's just terrible.
It's absolutely, yeah, I agree with you in that. It's very emotional. It really hits you very quickly, even if you don't necessarily understand exactly what FGM is. From the video alone, you can tell that it's something that's incredibly difficult and heartbreaking, and it has such a huge impact on girls and women. Absolutely. Seema, I think you had your hand up as well.
Yeah, I did, thank you. I just wanted to, I guess, I have no idea how to frame this, observation or question as well, because FGM happens in a lot of communities and stuff, and I guess I'm really worried that while I want it to be prioritized and understood that it does happen in a lot of African communities, I don't want it, I guess, to be forgotten or just associated with just African communities as well. And I think something that I've always been mindful of is it was actually a colleague of mine during the last FGM training that I went on that said actually it happens a lot in Egypt, and it does happen a lot in other kind of in certain Afghan communities as well. And I guess I'm worried about, while it's important to understand that it does happen in a lot of African communities, I don't want us to lose sight of it happening in other communities and just associating it for one ethnic community as opposed to like others. It might influence, I guess, our assessments of families and stuff, and actually we need to ensure that we're asking all families and stuff when we see that. I hope I've said that in a really sensitive way. I don't mean to tread on any toes or anything, or say anything disrespectfully.
I agree. No, absolutely. There's this idea that FGM is an African problem, but it's not. It happens in so many different parts of the world. In the slide where I'll be talking about prevalence, I will mention the sort of different ethnicities or different communities who practice it, but it happens everywhere. And there's this unfortunate idea that, oh, well, it doesn't happen here, so it's not something that we need to be concerned about. But actually, with the UK being the melting pot that it is, particularly with different types of communities moving into various different areas, it's not just big cities anymore. People are moving around to various different areas. It's something that we as professionals should be incredibly aware of. Because as well as that, I'll be talking about other harmful practices too, just to sort of mentioning the different types. There can be a lot of interconnecting sort of different practices. So FGM could also be part of forced marriage. So, the victim survivor might have also gone through that, or they might have also gone through honor-based abuse. So to think, well, it doesn't happen here, we don't really need to worry about it that much, is really risky. Particularly for children who might be growing up in a family where it's prevalent. Absolutely. Zoe said, I cared for a woman from Abu Dhabi who had FGM. She shared her story that happened to her when she was 10. Yes, absolutely. When it comes to age ranges, there is no set age. It can happen at any time. Absolutely, yeah. And those memories can stay forever. So what is FGM? We keep saying the term, but what is it? So it stands for female genital mutilation. It comprises of all procedures that involve partial or total removal of the external female genitalia. So that would be the vulva as well as the vagina, or any other injury to the female genital organs for non-medical reasons. And the key phrase that we need to remember there is non-medical reasons. So I appreciate that. I've had this question quite often, you know, what's the difference between FGM and male circumcision? And there's a lot of valid concerns around non-medical reasons for male circumcision, but the two acts aren't comparable. We can't say that they're the same. While female genital mutilation might be known by the name female circumcision, it's not actually the same as male circumcision. So with male circumcision, there can be a need for a medical necessity for it to be done. It can be done as a routine procedure under local anesthetic if you know the patient wants that. And there's no desire to control male sexuality or male sexual desire through doing through putting that person through circumcision. If anything, it can actually aid those things for that boy or that man involved. As well as that, we'll be talking a little bit more about the different types, but type 1 FGM would be the equivalent of removing the head of the penis. And type 3 would be removing all the external male genitalia and then sewing that area up and leaving a tiny opening for them to pass urine through. So as you can see, it's just not the same, but it is a question that gets asked quite often, and it's a valid question. You know, what's the difference? Because when people hear female circumcision, it can be quite confusing. But it's just to sort of let you all know what that is. So the practice can cause a lot of pain. It has several immediate and long-term effects, whether that's physical or mental. And FGM has no health benefits, and we know that it interferes dramatically with the natural function of a girl or a woman's body. Each part of your body is there for a reason, and it has a function. So when that gets removed, it can cause a lot of difficulty for that girl or that woman. And I'll be talking a little bit more about the consequences later. Okay, so we're going to do a quick quiz. So what I'd like to do is I will put the question into the chat bar, and if you could put your answers into the chat for me, that would be fantastic. There's 5 questions. So the first question is FGM is only illegal within the UK. Is that true or false? Okay, a lot of people are saying false. Great stuff. Okay. So question number 2. There are religious reasons for FGM to happen. Okay. What is the cultural thinking behind FGM within the societies that practice within it? We'll be talking a little bit more about that actually in terms of the reasons why FGM happens. So hopefully I'll be able to answer your question with one of the slides later. Okay, question number 3. FGM only happens when you're an adult. Okay, a lot of people saying false. Mandatory reporting of FGM is for anyone between the ages of 0 to 25.
Could you say that again, please?
Sure. So the mandatory reporting we have as professionals for anyone who's at risk of FGM or who's been through FGM is between the ages of 0 to 25. Is that true or false? Okay, we have a mixture of answers. So some are saying true, some are saying false. And the last question, which is between April 2020 to March 2021, there were 58 women in the southeast of England, including Hampshire, recorded on the FGM enhanced dataset. Is that true or false? Okay, a lot of us are saying true. Had a couple of falses. Okay, true question mark like that. Not sure. That's fine. No problem at all. Okay, so question number 1. Is FGM only illegal in the UK? That's false. Out of the 92 countries with available data on FGM, 51 countries, so that's 55%, have prohibited laws against FGM across the world. So in the UK, FGM was banned in 1985 as part of the Prohibition of Female Circumcision Act, but we are not the only country or nation who has made it illegal. Number 2, there are some religious reasons for FGM. So that's also false. So while the practice can be found within Christian, Muslim, Jewish communities, none of the holy texts or any of the religious texts promote or advise FGM. Okay, question number 3. FGM only happens when you're an adult. So that's also false. So the age can vary depending on where you're from, depending on your background, your family, the community you come from. So it can start from when a baby is born. She could be a few days old up until older age. Some women will have it done when they're just before puberty. Some will have it done just before marriage. Others may have it done once they've had a baby. So it can happen at different points in a girl or a woman's life. Question number 4. So is also false. So actually, the mandatory reporting age stops at 18. However, this is just looking at sort of mandatory reporting for children. But there are different rules for safeguarding when it comes to adults. So if an adult woman were to disclose that she's had FGM and she wants support around that, while you don't have to make a mandatory reporting duty for her, you can still support her with getting the right kind of help. And question number 5. So between April 2020 to March 2021, there were 58 women in the southeast of England, including Hampshire, recorded on the FGM enhanced data set. So that was also false. There were actually 200 women in the southeast of England that were recorded in that period of time. So it's actually higher than we thought. Okay, fantastic. Thank you, everybody. Let's move on to the next slide. So as I mentioned earlier, FGM is part of many different types of harmful practices. So on this slide, we've mentioned a few different ones. However, there are more. So this is not an exhaustive list, but these are the ones you might hear about more often. So honor-based abuse and violence, breast ironing or breast flattening, child abuse linked to faith and belief, forced marriage, and FGM, as well honor killings being linked to honor-based abuse. The different harmful practices can be connected to each other. So you may have someone that you work with who has been through FGM as well as a forced marriage, or a forced marriage as well as honor-based violence or abuse. And there can be a variety of different types of harmful practices also connected to domestic abuse. So it won't be unusual if you work with someone, speak to someone who may have been through several of these practices. However, that's not always the case. It can be that someone has just been through FGM because that is what their community or their family practices and believes in. FGM is a multi-agency issue, and I feel it's really important to just address this, that multi-professional training is necessary just to raise that awareness. And in terms of multi-agency issue, it's covering education, social care, community services, border force, health, housing, and police. All of these different fields work with those who may be vulnerable, or those who have been through this type of practice. So it's really important that we try to raise our awareness as much as we can and have these conversations, because these are difficult conversations, but they're important. And the more we know, the better we can support people. Okay. So there are lots of different names for FGM. So female genital mutilation is actually a medical term. Many women who have come from communities where they practice it might not know it by FGM. However, they might know it as cutting or female circumcision. So the female circumcision term, as I mentioned earlier, can be quite can be quite misconceiving or misleading. It just suggests that it's similar to the male circumcision when it's not. But a lot of women will call it circumcision. So it's just bearing that in mind, in that they might be more comfortable with that term. And then cutting is also another a term commonly used. Many people feel that the word mutilation is stigmatizing, it's offensive, whereas cutting is more of a practical way of describing it. So there are various different communities that call it by different names, such as Sunnah. So many Muslim communities will call it Sunnah. Sunnah means recommended within the within Muslim language. And you might also hear it named as Bondo. So the Bondo Society is a matriarchal society within Sierra Leone, and they are the ones who will perform the procedure on young girls who are going through the rite of passage to become women. So the FGM National Network, so I've got the address here at the bottom for you. It has a large interactive map that informs you of the specific communities or countries and how they refer to the practice, which is really useful as professionals, because if we work with someone from a particular country, then we can find out what they might know it as before we even start working with them. As well as that, it helps to understand what types are the most common in that area or in that country, as well as prevalence numbers. This is the same for another website or another charity called 28 Too Many. And it looks at 28 different countries where FGM is prevalent, and it talks about the same sort of things as the FGM National Network does. Okay, so there are 4 different types of FGM. Type 1 is the partial or total removal of the clitoris and or the prepuce. Type 1 can be divided into divisions of 1A and 1B. Type 2, otherwise known as excision, is the partial or total removal of the clitoris and the labia minora, so that's the inner lips, with or without the excision of the labia majora, which is the outer lips. So type 2 is also divided into subdivisions as well. There can be variations, basically, of these types. Type 3, otherwise known as infibulation, which may be potentially the most extreme of the different types, is where the external genitalia is removed. Then the vaginal opening is narrowed by creating a seal. So it's essentially stitched. This could be with or without the excision of the clitoris. There's a small opening left to allow urine or menstrual blood to pass through. Type 4 is any other harmful procedure or practice towards the female external genitalia for non-medical purposes. So that could include things such as pricking or any piercings, incisions, scraping, or cauterization. Type 4 is much more difficult sometimes to identify because it can be over a very small area of the genitalia, and so it might not be as obvious for medical professionals to find, or it might not be as obvious for the person who has been through the procedure to actually identify it themselves. It can be quite difficult for women to identify what type they've had because they might not have been told, or they might not have learned what healthy genitalia looked like before they had their FGM. So sometimes it can be quite difficult trying to gather data of the different types and who has had what type for that reason. However, if someone is unsure, they can always go to their GP and see if they can have an appointment, or they can go to the hospital and see if they can speak to the gynecology department there. Okay. How is FGM performed? So FGM is usually performed by traditional birth attendants or professional cutters. So these are usually elderly women within the community who may have had the tradition passed down from their mother or their grandmother, and so they've been doing this practice for a really long time. It can also be family members, so that could include aunts, grandmothers, mothers, sisters, anyone. But it depends on the community that person comes from and what's more feasible for their family too. So the practice is often done without any sort of pain relief. There's no anesthetic involved, and it can cause excruciating pain for the victims. In some communities, the wounds are held together by various different objects, or herbs might be used. Herbs might be placed into the vagina to try and help heal. But of course, we can understand that that can actually end up causing more infections and more pain down the line. So many studies highlight this concerning trend as well, that there are various places in the world where medically trained professionals are performing FGM. So places such as Malaysia, there are actually clinics where they will perform FGM in a clinical setting, with the understanding that because there's anesthetic involved and there's a doctor involved, that it will be less painful and more helpful to that girl or that woman. However, there is no medical need for FGM to be performed, whether it's done in a clinical setting or not. It's unnecessary, medically speaking, and if anything, it's actually breaking the Hippocratic Oath to do no harm to that person by having a doctor perform it. So there is that issue, unfortunately, that some healthcare providers are actually performing this within a clinical setting. So it's just something to bear in mind. So when is FGM performed? So there's a chart here looking at the different sort of ages and the different types of FGM that you can have done, and when this might be happening. But it can happen at any given age. So it can happen when the girl is a baby, or when a woman is a bit older in life. The common sort of age range is between 5 to 14 years of age. So looking at England, so this graph is the most recent annual FGM dataset report. And hopefully you'll be able to look at that a little bit closer later. This highlights the need for professionals to safeguard children who are at risk from an early age. And as well as that, to understand that for any adults that we work with, they may have been very young when they had FGM performed on them. They may not have very strong memories of everything that happened, or their memories might be incredibly clear of that day. I have found, working with women who've been through FGM, that they remember almost everything of the day that the FGM was performed. However, due to trauma and due to the way our memory works because of trauma, it can be quite difficult sometimes to gather all of our memories around that. Okay. Also, a large number of type 4 FGM recorded after the age of 18. These statistics also capture genital piercings. So just to let you know about that as well. We might not necessarily think of genital piercings as part of FGM. I guess it's depending on the context, of course, of what it is, but it is still considered part of FGM. So why is FGM performed? There are various different reasons as to why FGM is performed, and they're not necessarily due to medical reasons. So there's this belief that it's a religious obligation. None of the holy texts or religions promote or advise FGM at all, but there may be some communities who say this is a religious requirement for us that women have FGM performed. So just something to bear in mind. Controlling women's sexuality or preserving their virginity. So as you can imagine, particularly with type 3, it would encourage a girl or a woman to not have sex before marriage. Type 1 or clitoridectomy can reduce sexual desire for a lot of women, and there's many myths around the clitoris as well, that it's poisonous, that it's dangerous, that it can make people ill, that babies can die upon contact during delivery. This can be due to various different reasons. So in a lot of these communities where FGM is practiced, sex or sexual education is a taboo. And so there can be a lot of misconceptions around the female anatomy and the different parts of the body, particularly around the clitoris. So some believe that by performing FGM, it ensures marital fidelity and also controls women's behavior, particularly before marriage. So women who have sex before marriage might be considered immoral, or if they haven't been cut, then they might be seen as prostitutes and stigmatized for not having had the procedure. Many believe that FGM is necessary for a girl to be considered a complete woman. So the removal of the genitalia is thought to enhance that girl's femininity and make her more desirable. Hygiene is another one as well. So there's this idea that the female genitalia is ugly or dirty, and so removing it makes it cleaner and much more aesthetically pleasing. There can be a lot of social pressure. So this fear of being stigmatized because you haven't had FGM done can be really big. So if you can imagine being in a community where FGM is the norm, if you haven't had FGM performed and people find out about that, which can happen because in many communities they will cut girls around a similar age to each other at the same time. So if a girl hits the age of, say, 13, and there may be many girls who hit that age around the same time in the same neighborhood or the same community, they will have FGM performed at the same time. If a girl doesn't have it done, or people find out that her family may have lied and said that she had FGM performed, but then they found out she didn't, it can affect every part of her life. It can affect her trying to go to the shop and buy a pint of milk because she might be refused service. She might not be able to sit on public transport because they believe if she sits on that seat that it will contaminate it. She might not be invited to certain events. She might not be allowed to work in certain places. So it can affect every aspect of a girl or a woman's life. It's not just necessarily about making her marriage material or ensuring that she can find a partner. And due to this fear of stigma or rejection from their communities, they may then seek out that practice later on in life if they haven't had FGM performed when they were younger. There can be a lot of family expectations as well to maintain family honor. So cutting brings status not just to the girl, but also her family. And so there can be a lot of pressure from the family for her to have it done. Honor and gender-based violence and transition to womanhood, this idea that once you've had FGM, you've become a woman. It's a rite of passage. So women won't be chosen to be married to unless they've been cut. So the woman or the girl may not come from a background where FGM is practiced. However, her husband may. And so one of the requirements may be before they get married, she has to have FGM performed. And it will be the same if they have daughters, that the daughters will have to have FGM performed on them as well. So it makes a woman more desirable for marriage. It also has many economic issues as well. Many women might not have the right to inherit. They might not have be able to inherit money, land, or property, or anything like that because they haven't had FGM. And as well as that, there can be a lot of dependency on men within these communities because women can either work but they don't get paid much, or they can't work at all in a lot of these areas. And so they need their husband to be able to support them financially. So there can be lots of different reasons as to why this happens. Another reason as well is that many law enforcement around these areas where FGM happens might not have a very good understanding of what FGM is. They might be concerned about coming across as racist or insensitive or offending that community because this is believed to be a traditional cultural part of their practice. And so it means that many girls and women might not be able to get support from the police in their local area because they might not want to get involved, or they might have a real ignorance around what FGM is, and so they don't know how to best protect that person. And this can happen in the UK too. I feel like the awareness raising has definitely become much better in the last how many years, but there's still many places where FGM is not as well understood, and so for that reason there may be many at risk who aren't getting the support that they need because those within the police or let's say any other agencies aren't able to see the signs or the risk indicators of that person. Okay. So in terms of prevalence of the practice, there's growing evidence that FGM takes place all across the world in numerous different countries. So while there are many African countries where FGM happens, it also happens within India, certain parts of Pakistan, certain parts of Kurdistan or Afghanistan as well. There are many cases that happen in the UK as well as the US of A. It's estimated that more than 200 million girls and women worldwide have been subjected to FGM already. In the UK, we have some figures from 2015, 2016, gathered by a fantastic organisation called Forward. These were 2015, 2016, and it was 167,000 girls under the age of 15 were at risk. And many more had already gone through the effects. However, even at that time, those numbers were probably inaccurate and outdated. It can be very difficult to try and gather data around how many women and girls have been affected by FGM. And this is for various different reasons as well. In many countries abroad, there isn't necessarily a system for birth certificates and death certificates. For this reason, there might not actually be a record of a person existing. The people who were in her family or who grew up with her knew that she existed. However, she may have passed away because she had FGM performed on her. Many girls and women unfortunately do die due to the immediate effects of FGM. But because there's no birth certificate or no death certificate, there's no record of her existing. As well as that, many girls and women who die due to FGM might not have it recorded as that's why they've passed away. It may be that the other reasons are put down. So yeah, it can be very tricky trying to find out exactly how many girls and women have been affected, but this is what we know. The most recent sort of data says 200 million girls and women worldwide. With coronavirus as well, that has also changed things. So there was an increased risk for many girls in many different countries when it came to FGM during the pandemic because they couldn't go to school, they couldn't leave their homes, and so they were trapped within their homes. And many professional cutters were going door to door selling their services to different families. So in the next 5 years, we might have an idea of actually how the pandemic affected many of those who were at risk of FGM or who might have had FGM done. But the number will probably be very high. So Africa, FGM is concentrated in 28 countries in a band that spans from West Africa to the Horn of Africa, as you can see here. So this darker colour shows prevalence of 91 to 100%. So that would be countries such as Mali or Somaliland or Somalia. So it can vary widely across Africa. It can be as high as 98% in Somalia or as low as 1% in Uganda. And these ethnic communities often spread across different country borders as well. So, for example, Somali communities practice FGM in Somalia as well as in Kenya, while the Maasai community practice FGM in both Kenya and Tanzania. So there can be some overlap. Yes, I know Seema said there was a huge risk in the pandemic and the lack of school education access. Yeah, absolutely. Because children couldn't go to school, it just increased their risk. Yeah. So yes, within Africa, there are various different countries where it is more prevalent and more likely to happen. But something to bear in mind, whether it's Africa or any other country, is that FGM doesn't necessarily happen because of that nationality. It happens because of ethnic backgrounds. So you may come from a tribe within Somalia where you don't practice FGM at all. However, your next door neighbours, the tribe who lives maybe in the next neighbourhood, they do come from a practicing background. So it's really essential to remember that it's not always necessarily that you come from Somalia, so you'll be practicing FGM. There's more of a likelihood because of the high prevalence rates and everything there, but it's really about the background that the victim or survivor comes from. So as well as Africa, there's the Middle East. FGM is reported in at least 5 Middle Eastern countries, including Iraq, Iran, Oman, the UAE and Yemen. Many Kurdish communities will also practice FGM as well. It's suspected that FGM is practiced within many African migration communities in the Middle East, especially from high FGM prevalence countries like Egypt, Sudan, Somalia and Ethiopia. It also happens in some parts of Asia, so there is evidence that suggests that FGM is practiced in south of Thailand, Singapore and Brunei, as well as in Sri Lanka among the Malaysian community. FGM is also prevalent in some areas of Afghanistan, Pakistan, the Philippines and the Maldives. In Australia and New Zealand, FGM is prevalent among some migrating communities, so this can also happen in various different countries where these people haven't necessarily been born in that country, but they've migrated to them or their families have migrated there. Studies have shown as well that in Southeast Asia, FGM is practiced by more than 90% of the Muslim population in Indonesia and Malaysia as well. So 500,000 women living in Europe are estimated to have been subjected to FGM. 180,000 girls and women in Europe are estimated to be at risk of FGM each year. And we know it's practiced within some communities in Europe, such as Austria, Germany, Spain, Sweden, and of course the United Kingdom. Although we know that FGM is predominantly prevalent in Africa, it is important to recognise that it happens everywhere. We need to remain vigilant for that reason. Okay, so what are the risk factors and signs that we need to be aware of? So this is if someone is at risk of FGM. So a child's family might be from an at-risk community or of FGM, and this includes adults as well. A family living with extended family or a relative or a cutter who visits from abroad. A long holiday abroad or going home to visit family. A female relative has been cut, so that could be mums, grandmothers, sisters, cousins, any other female relative. Family might not have been fully integrated into the UK yet, so there may be language barriers. They might not be accessing certain services. A special occasion or a ceremony is talked about quite often as well, about this girl becoming a woman, or she might be going through a special procedure. During the UK summer holidays, it's quite commonly known as cutting season, particularly because you get 6 weeks off from school. And so there is plenty of time to have the procedure done, and then for that girl or that woman to allow her wounds to heal before they return to education. Unexpected, repeated or prolonged absences as well. That can be from school, that can be from work. And it's important to remember that you might not necessarily have just one risk factor that comes up. So someone might genuinely be going on a long holiday abroad to see their family. They might not necessarily be at risk of FGM, but if you hear of other risk factors as well as that, then that person may be at danger of having FGM performed. So in terms of the signs of someone who's had FGM, there may be, for children, there may be a refusal to attend PE lessons or any other kind of physical activity. There may be frequent use of the bathroom, extended periods in the bathroom as well, particularly if they had type 3. It may be very difficult for them to pass urine or menstrual blood because of the small opening. There can be a real change in their behaviour, so they might be more withdrawn or anxious or depressed. They might have difficulty walking, standing or sitting, and these are all things that we do without thinking. So you might see that this person is going through a lot of pain, unfortunately, because of that. Asking for help but not having the language or being able to be explicit about what kind of help they need. So many people might be embarrassed or fearful of getting their families into trouble if they talk about what's happened to them. Or they might not have the language to explain what's happened. They might be very embarrassed talking about that part of their body, but they might be asking for help. And it's about having that open, honest conversation, trying to be non-judgmental and listening to them and asking them open-ended questions. They might be displaying secretive, isolating or challenging behavior as well. So they might have become aggressive, angry, or they might become more difficult to be around. And again, these are all different signs that show that this person might have gone through FGM. And if this is the case, it may be that we as professionals have to have that conversation with them first to see how we can support them. Okay, so I've got a chat bar task for everybody. Can you name any short or long-term effects of FGM? Anybody have any idea of any short or long-term effects? Recurrent UTIs, infections, difficulty in child, yeah, scarring, absolutely, PTSD, childbirth trauma, yeah, absolutely. Change of behavior, yeah. Emotional trauma, absolutely. Bladder infections. Stress and depression, yes. Brilliant, yeah, absolutely. Loss of childhood, yeah. We don't talk about loss of childhood as often, but absolutely it changes a person going through FGM, and it means that that innocence is lost. Isolation and exclusion, yep, absolutely. We've had some great answers. Thank you, everyone. ACEs, yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Brilliant. Thank you for all your answers. So in terms of the immediate effects that can happen once FGM is performed, there can be severe pain, shock, fractures or dislocation due to the way that the person has been restrained. Usually there'll be more than one woman involved when the procedure is being done. So there may be the cutter and there may be other women who are there to hold down said girl or woman. There can be excessive bleeding, infections as well due to the type of instruments used, particularly if a professional cutter is cutting multiple girls at the same time. They're not using different instruments. They're using the same cutting utensil on all of them. So that can increase infections. And excessive swelling is included in that too. Problems with urination, so they might not be able to retain urine, or they might have a lot of pain passing urine too. And when it comes to long-term effects, there can be painful urination, so due to obstruction of the urethra and recurrent urinary tract infections, which I know a lot of you mentioned, vaginal problems, so things like discharge, itching, bacterial vaginosis and other infections, menstrual problems as well. So obstruction of the vaginal opening might lead to a lot of pain during menstruation, irregular menses, and difficulty in passing menstrual blood, particularly if you've had type 3. Sexual health problems too. So FGM damages anatomic structures that are directly involved in female sexual function. And so it can have an effect on a woman's sexual health and well-being. Removal of or any kind of damage to highly sensitive genital tissue as well, especially the clitoris, can affect sexual sensitivity, can lead to sexual health problems later on in life, such as a decreased sexual desire and pleasure, pain during sex, difficulty during penetration, or decreased lubrication during intercourse, and reduced frequency or absence of orgasm, otherwise known as anorgasmia. So there can be a lot of scar tissue and keloids involved as well due to the way that the body has healed after, and this can cause childbirth complications too. So FGM is associated with an increased risk of cesarean section, postpartum hemorrhage, recourse to episiotomy, difficult labours. So a labour might take a lot longer, it might be more painful, obstetric tears and lacerations, and extended maternal hospital stay as well. There can be an increased risk to the child as well. So the baby might die due to not having a wide enough opening through the birth canal, or lack of oxygen, or just due to the prolonged labour process. So there can be death due to result from infections, including tetanus, as well as hemorrhage. And of course, there can also be emotional and mental health problems involved as well. So it's not just physical. The pain and the shock and the use of physical force during the event can cause trauma, as well as a sense of betrayal when family members have allowed this to happen, or who have planned for this to happen. Many girls as well will not know what's happening to them until the day of. It will not necessarily be mentioned due to this taboo of talking about the female anatomy, talking about sex, and talking about what FGM actually is. So there can be a lot of shock and anger towards those who have planned it, or those who allowed it to happen. Research in African communities show that women who have had FGM have the same level of PTSD as adults who were subjected to other forms of abuse in their childhood as well. So PTSD can include things such as flashbacks, nightmares, anxiety, being triggered by certain smells, certain areas. And it can be very difficult for those who come from communities where mental health isn't really talked about. So there can be this feeling of helplessness as well, of who do I speak to when FGM is the norm in my community? Who is going to understand and support me? Can I speak to my doctor? Can I speak to my family? A lot of the time, unfortunately, it's no. And that can increase these levels of emotional distress and helplessness and anxiety. So it's really important that we recognise and understand that FGM is a form of abuse. Even if it's not intended as abuse, it is a form of abuse, and it can cause so many different types of long-term and immediate effects for girls and women who go through it. So the implications in pregnancy would include things such as flashbacks. They might not be identified antenatally, scarring and restriction of the vaginal canal, as I mentioned before. It's really important for midwives and obstetric services to have a really good knowledge and understanding on FGM, as often maternity might be the first port of call. They might be the first healthcare setting that women will access where FGM will become known and become identified. The most recent annual report in England suggests that almost 80% of data collection were from attendances to the maternity or obstetric services. So midwives are usually the first professionals to actually identify FGM and then be able to support that woman through not only her pregnancy and her labour process, but also getting external support as well. And of course, the most extreme things that can happen is that mum could die or baby could die or both could pass away due to FGM. So it's really important that we remember how it can affect those involved in various different ways, both physically and mentally. So when it comes to legal frameworks, under the FGM Act of 2003, it is an offence in England, Wales and Northern Ireland for anyone, regardless of their nationality and resident status, to perform FGM on someone else, to plan for FGM to be performed on this person, or to assist this person to carry out FGM on themselves. Section 72 makes parents or carers of a child liable for failing to prevent their child being subjected to FGM. Section 73 introduced FGM protection orders to protect girls who are at risk. So this is for anyone up until the age of 18. The FGM protection order doesn't necessarily apply for adults, but there are various different ways that we can protect adults as well. It's just not with a protection order. It also introduced a mandatory reporting duty of all types of FGM, requiring regulated health and social care professionals to report known cases in under 18s to the police. And actually, the different types of professions that have mandatory reporting duties is quite wide. It's anyone who really comes into contact with young people or children. So with an FGM protection order, it's a civil court order and it's unique to each case. It includes things such as passport removal to ensure that child doesn't get taken abroad to have FGM performed. There might be conditions around travel as well up until the age of 18, support from the Home Office while they're abroad. And also protection within the UK. So we know that obviously FGM doesn't always just happen abroad, it can happen in the UK as well, and it protects that child essentially from having it done anywhere. Okay. So with a FGM protection order, it can help if you believe that you are at risk of FGM, you have already had FGM committed on you and you want further protection, or you know someone who is at risk of FGM. And you can apply for this through the family court, and anyone can fill this out. If you are filling this out with a client and you need some support, then you can always speak to the police, or you can speak to the forced marriage unit, who also can support with FGM protection orders. So examples of what you might want the court to order are that the respondent does not take you or the person to be protected abroad, that the respondent does not enter into any arrangements in the UK or abroad for FGM to be performed, and that the respondent surrenders their passport as well. The closest court that we have is the Portsmouth Combined Court Centre, and they can help with protection orders there. And Hampshire's Constabulary actually has a practical guide on how to obtain an FGM protection order. So in the resource list, there'll be a link there. Okay. So the first ever prosecution that happened in the UK was back in 2019. A 37-year-old woman from London was convicted in February of that year for performing FGM on her then 3-year-old daughter. So the case actually included witchcraft, such as spells and curses that were intended to deter the police and social workers from investigating what they found in the woman's house. The only reason that FGM was identified was because while it was performed at home, the the mum and so the couple of the who were looking after the child had to take her to hospital, and it was actually at Whips Cross Hospital in Leytonstone that they identified that this girl had been put through FGM, and they reported it to the police. So this was the first ever conviction in the UK, and considering the law around FGM began in 1985 with the Prohibition of Female Circumcision Act, it's a long time before a conviction had actually happened. But it just goes to show how difficult it can be for FGM to be prosecuted because of the type of evidence that you need. Where the girl was taken to hospital and they immediately identified that she'd been put through FGM recently, steps could be taken to protect her. So the woman, the 37-year-old woman, the mother of the child, was actually given 13 years in prison for her actions, and there was a man involved. I don't know if it was the dad of the little girl involved or if it was the mum's partner, but he got charged with accessory, and I don't believe he got any prison time. But it just goes to show how difficult it can be to actually get to that status, to that level, considering it took so long before we could get to our first conviction. So in some ways, while the law is incredibly important and is what we use to base our safeguarding on, sometimes it's much more important to raise awareness in different ways. Particularly for many victims who've been through FGM, they might be concerned about speaking to the police because there might be quite a lot of distrust, particularly from the communities they've come from. They might be frightened that they will get into trouble as well if they speak to the police or they go through legal procedures to protect themselves. So it's just something to bear in mind. So when it comes to human rights, FGM is a violation of a girl or a woman's human rights in accordance with several international human rights laws. So the 1989 UNCRC, so that's the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child, was designed to protect and promote the rights of children worldwide. In 2019, it was ratified by 181 countries. The Universal Declaration of Human Rights lists 30 rights and freedoms that belong to all of us, and FGM has been included under Goal 5 of the Sustainable Development Goals, as enacted by the UN Initiative to Transform Our World. So Goal 5 is gender equality, and the aim is to mobilise international communities, national governments, key stakeholders, communities and individuals to achieve this goal by 2030. The ban on FGM as well. The adoption of the resolution is not an end in itself, but it is just the beginning of a new chapter against the fight with FGM. So it's really important to remember that while it may be a traditional or a cultural understanding or practice, it's actually going against that person's human rights. So talking a little bit more about mandatory reporting. So if anyone here does work with young people or children with mandatory reporting, girls under 18 who disclose that they've had FGM or they're at risk of FGM, this is when mandatory reporting would kick in. So when you see signs or symptoms in a young person, to see that they've had FGM or they might be speaking about it and you might believe that they're at risk. So you can call your designated safeguarding lead or you can speak to the police. You accurately need to record any actions or decisions. You need to speak to that person as well and explain what you're going to do and essentially let them know what the steps are. So you can speak to the police on their non-emergency number, which is 101, as soon as possible, and explain that you're reporting under the FGM mandatory reporting duty. Try and inform the child involved. If it's safe to, you can speak to the family. However, if you believe that reporting would lead to a risk of serious harm to the child or anyone else, then don't have this discussion with the family. You can use a professional judgment on whether you believe that this would increase the risk for them or not. So failure to comply with mandatory reporting would be considered through existing fitness to practice proceedings with your regulator. So the safety of the girl or the other individuals at risk of harm is the most important thing. If you've identified a case but the patient is over 18, then the duty does not apply, but you can signpost this woman to services offering support and advice. You may also need to carry out a safeguarding risk assessment, considering any children who might be at risk as well. Okay, there is something called the FGM information sharing. So the FGM-IS is a national IT system that supports the early intervention and ongoing safeguarding of girls and women. or those under age of 18 who have a family history of FGM. So the data is collected by healthcare providers, and that includes hospitals, mental health services, and GP practices. So the system contains an indicator that a girl has a family history of FGM and the date that the FGM indicator was added onto the system. So there's quite a few pros to this in terms of allowing various different types of medical professionals to understand the risks involved. And it shares that information as well. So, you know, there can be protection from not just one professional, but many. It prompts a professional as well to consider if they need to take any other safeguarding actions. And it also provides an opportunity to strengthen the local safeguarding frameworks and processes. Okay. The NHS FGM Enhanced Dataset supports the Department of Health's prevention programme. So it presents this national picture of the prevalence of FGM in England. And the data is used to produce information. So that could be things like how to improve how the NHS supports women and girls who are at risk, planning the local NHS services as well, needed now and in the future, and also helping other organisations to understand what FGM is and how they can support someone who is at risk or who's been through it. And the data is collected from various different aspects of the NHS, and then is published. So there are statistics that can be used and that can be looked at. So there can also be identification of FGM, treatment of FGM, and the birth of a baby girl to a mother known to have had FGM, and any sort of piercings that might be included as well. So it can be a really fantastic source of information. So just looking at some statistics from the most recent annual report and looking at the southeast of England here, we can see that 200 women recorded on the NHS data set, and 50 of these had had type 1 and 35 of them had had type 2, and 20 had had type 3. Okay, so we have another video here. It's called Your Job to Ask. So hopefully we can play that now. This video is actually aimed at health professionals, but it's relevant for all multi-agency professionals. It just highlights the importance of asking the question and the ways that we can do that.
Different kinds of nurses do different kinds of roles, but we all have an obligation to speak to women who could be at risk from FGM.
Okay, so asking the question, it can be quite tricky and nerve-wracking asking questions around FGM. Some tips for you in terms of having that conversation is to try and create an opportunity for an open and honest conversation. Trying to be non-judgmental and as sensitive as possible, because this is a very tricky conversation to have, not only for us as professionals, but also for the person involved. This might be the first time that they've actually talked about what's happened to them. They might feel worried or fearful that someone will find out. So it's just reassuring that person that this is a confidential conversation that you're having between the two of you, and also to allow them to know that if anything needs to happen, so if there is any risk to them or to a child involved, these are the steps that you would have to take. So you're being open and honest about it. If you need an interpreter, try not to get an interpreter that is from the same community as that person. So if you can get a professional interpreter from another area of the country, that might be a lot easier, or someone who doesn't know her. Think about your body language as well, because this can obviously help or not help the situation. Just remaining professional as well, explaining why you need to discuss FGM, recording all information that is provided to you so that you have a good assessment of what the case is, just being respectful and empathetic. I'm sure I don't need to teach you how to, do those things, but it's really important to just try and remember, how to remain as empathetic as possible so that this person doesn't feel judged. Using simple language as well, so maybe try and avoid technical or medical jargon that they might not understand, unless absolutely necessary, of course, and considering culturally appropriate language as well. So you might want to ask them, what is the term that you use in your community for FGM? Is it one of these names? And then they'll tell you, so then you can use the correct term that's the most comfortable for them. You can start with general questions as well, things such as, I noticed that you come from a country where communities practice FGM. Do you know what FGM is? Or, having that conversation of what is the term used within your community? Has this happened to you at all? Would you want to practice that with your children? Having these conversations and making sure that you're as clear as possible is very important. If she's unsure, if she's been subjected to FGM, or she doesn't know what type she's had, then you can use more leading questions. So you can ask about any sort of pain they may have experienced, or if they've had any problems with UTIs or any other physical health consequences. Many women might not have any physical health consequences, but they may have had mental or emotional. So it's good to ask for those things as well. Just trying to create that opportunity to have a conversation with them can be really important, because they may have been seeking support, but they just didn't know how to ask or who to ask. So this is a statement opposing FGM. It can be taken abroad to explain the criminal status of FGM in the UK. It outlines what FGM is, the legislation and penalties involved, and the help and support available as well. So in 2012, the government published this, commonly referred to as the health passport, and it's a pocket-sized document that essentially sets out the law and potential criminal penalties that can be used for anyone allowing FGM to happen. And it can come in a variety of languages as well, so it's not just in English. So just looking at COVID-19, so I mentioned how COVID-19 and the pandemic has affected FGM. So according to the End FGM EU network, the recent outbreak has seen an increase of FGM in Kenya, which was otherwise seeing a decline in prevalence rates. So the closure of schools, pressures on law enforcement, and an overwhelmed health system, including requirements for social distancing, created a condition resulting in the resumption of FGM and early marriage activities as well. So child marriage can also be quite closely linked to FGM. FGM protection orders can still be obtained using forms online. So many girls are at more of an increased risk due to this. So there are some countries where they were doing very well in terms of anti-FGM campaigns, but due to the inability to travel or to see others outside of your bubble, it has been very difficult. So there's been a lot of concerns for the reduced protections for girls in lots of communities, and this increased risk as well of girls being potentially cut in the UK. So this is just looking at the Hampshire Safeguarding Children's Partnership. There's lots of different documents and FGM toolkits that you can have a look at, but I believe that the Portsmouth Safeguarding Adult Board also has different reading materials that you can look at as well, just in case you want to, you know, further look into FGM and also what you can do as a professional. So there's some information here about Portsmouth. So there's information about the MASH services or adult social care services, as well as Stop Domestic Abuse, which is the organisation that I come from, and also a local community group called African Women's Forum, who are also working with those who've been through FGM and raising awareness about it as well. This is information for Hampshire. So if you're working with someone but they don't necessarily live in Portsmouth, then these are the details that you can use to safeguard them. And this is the same for Southampton. So in Southampton, there is an organisation called Yellow Door, and they provide similar services to the harmful practices within Stop Domestic Abuse. But the details are there in case you need to contact them or anything. And this is some information for the Isle of Wight. So again, contacting Children's MASH or Adult Social Care Connect if you want to speak to someone about anyone who's at risk or who's had FGM. This is an information slide about different FGM clinics around the country. So with the FGM support clinics, basically they're a clinic that you can go and speak specifically about FGM that you've been through, or you might want to have surgery done, so restorative surgery. These clinics can also provide that as well. There's an antenatal clinic in Portsmouth that also offers support for women who've been through FGM. In Southampton, they also offer de-infibulation surgeries in their hospitals too. In the University College of London, they're the only ones who provide children's FGM services. So just to bear in mind with that one. And the next few slides are just resources that you can have a look at in case you ever want to look more into FGM or any sort of support for patients or professionals. And there's further learning down here as well. So that's the end of our